Hello.
Hello.
Well, welcome. Great to see you, Cody.
Yeah, thanks, Jigar. Good to see you too.
Well, this is my first time doing LinkedIn Live, so just trying to figure this out. But uh, but super excited to have you. I mean, we're really pleased to announce, along with fellow co-host Cleantech Leaders Climate Forum, the inaugural edition of the Demonstrate, Deploy, Decarbonize 2023 conference set to take place September 26th and 27th here in Washington, D.C. It's the first annual gathering of senior leaders in industry and across sectors to build momentum towards demonstrating new clean energy and decarbonization technologies, deploying them at scale, and really figuring out how to catalyze the deployment and investment into the next generation of infrastructure to achieve net zero while creating good jobs, strengthening domestic supply chains, and ensuring benefits are equitably shared. Uh, I wanted to start by just, having you, Cody, spend a couple of minutes talking about Brimstone and, what you guys do.
Yeah, thanks, Jigar. So at Brimstone, we're working on eliminating the production of greenhouse gas emissions from the production of cement. So as many folks listening may not know, cement is responsible for 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's about the same as cars, right? Cars globally are 6.7% was the most recent number I saw. So it's a really big piece of the problem. And one of the things that the LPO has been doing is focusing on industrial decarbonization, which is great because up until now, it's got almost no focus, right? So if you take investment dollars, for example, per ton of greenhouse gas emissions, transportation gets something like $14 or $15 per ton, whereas cement gets about 1 cent. Right? So this is, part of the reason why we are working on the problem because someone needs to. And at Brimstone, we take the strategy of we want to make sure that we maintain the exact same chemistry of what is produced today. So we don't want any barriers to adoption because we want to scale as fast as possible and as economically as possible. So we actually are the only company that can use a silicate rock that does not contain CO2 and produce the exact same cement material, which we think at scale could, scale globally and decarbonize, be the first, U.S. multinational company, as well as create a ton of jobs within the United States because cement, frankly, is too cheap to ship. So the production has to be in the United States.
So I saw that you guys had a big announcement on validating that in July, right?
That's right. Yeah. So in July, we had a third party validate that our process actually makes what's called ordinary Portland cement, which is the exact same cement that's produced. So, it can, go into the exact same system. The same builders can use the material in the exact same way. The regulations already exist and the trust of the product already exists. It's just a new process to make the same thing.
So let's talk about trust, right? Because I feel like when you think about the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act gave the Department of Energy a very clear mandate to commercialize technology, right? So I think before those pieces of legislation passed, DOE did some commercialization work, but ultimately really had more of an R&D focus. Um, as a result of that, right, we went out to the private sector and said, "Hey, what do you guys need us to do with all this, these new resources that we got?" And through that process, one of the things that we did was write these industrial decarbonization liftoff reports, which launched earlier this week. I've heard that you stayed up all night to read the cement one. How'd you think we did?
Yeah, well, I was being interviewed by Shah. You got to be prepared. The, uh, yeah, so I was actually incredibly impressed. So I was impressed, honestly, from the outset, right? So as a growth stage startup company, right, we do not get the opportunity to participate in the conversation as much as maybe multinational companies and that sort of thing do. However, the LPO did a really good job reaching out to us as well as our peer companies and trying to include us in the conversation so that these liftoff reports included both the perspective of major companies that are already producing cement today in the way that's very carbon intensive, as well as startup companies. And One of the things that I was, really took from it was the timeline, right? So, and I, fully agreed with it. So the initial stage, which is where we are now, is we can blend material in, and that's what big companies are doing in order to decarbonize a bit of cement. And then the next stage is alternative production processes, which is what Brimstone is doing. And then the stage after that is, after some time, we can build some more trust and maybe get alternative chemistries into the market. But it was, some really great synthesis around that.
So let's dig in deeper on that. So now you've got this trust thing, right? Where I mean, you guys are chemically identical to Portland cement, but I think there are many others who are not chemically identical. And for them, the blending process is something that they want to do. You get pushback from folks who are using the cement saying even a 1% blend or even a 2% blend might affect the quality or the durability of the project, et cetera. The U.S. government, in the liftoff report, talked about how NIST is in charge of setting some of those standards. It talked about how DOT has the ability to mandate the use of some of this clean cement. That the government sort of almost 50% of they're in charge of specifying almost 50% of all the cement used in the United States every year. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that, we've got all these monetary resources within the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, but now there's a lot of these non-monetary issues that you guys have to solve to be successful. And some of that is in the procurement side of things that we just talked about. Some of that is in specifying. I'm curious how a company like yours, engages, and and now that you've got the liftoff report in front of you, how do you use that liftoff report with your stakeholders?
Yeah, so we've only had it in front of us for about a day, so we will. I'm sure we'll think of more creative ways to use it. But to answer your question, or give a little more context, right? So as you mentioned, the government is the final payee or the specifier of about 50% of cement. So it is almost absurd to think that in the cement industry you could get to scale without interaction with the government, right? That's half of the market. So things like the liftoff report, as well as Deploy23 and just the LPO's work in general, has really been quite useful because we know that we and our peer companies can have a partner in this decarbonization strategy. The liftoff report specifically is a huge validator to investors, right? So this is something that I expect to be putting in our data room for investment and sending to investors ahead of calls to say, like, look, if you want some background on how this has to go, and what support the government can provide and what the support the government cannot provide and what is needed in order to decarbonize the sector, please look at this. And I really see the liftoff report being catalytic in sort of getting private finance to start thinking about decarbonization and the opportunities that are in decarbonization, like Brimstone and other companies.
That's great. So it really sets up a fact base that we can all work from to then figure out how we get to implementation. So let's transition now to the Deploy23 conference coming up, right? I mean, you guys are a growth stage company. I mean, you guys are working your butts off. I mean, why is this such a good use of your time, right? And what did you think of the format of the event?
Right. So the Deploy23 event is going to bring together basically all of the stakeholders relevant to the energy transition or the climate transition broadly. So it is no secret that the problem is very diverse, right? There is there are cement, there is energy, there is steel, there is aluminum, there's fuels, there's all these sort of things that need to be decarbonized, and they all intersect, right? So if we are going to install the world's clean energy future, then there's going to need cement in order to build the foundations of all of those plants. And similarly, if we are going to make clean cement of the future, we are going to need energy to do that. So on one end, there are customer relationships that we will be developing at this event, and we would not have access to this because we're all too busy running our own companies, and we don't get this in the same room. And the second part is, right, there are companies of various places in the or various stages of development. So I'll be able to interact with companies that have previously interacted with the Department of Energy and scaled to international scale, or built large manufacturing plants in the United States and that sort of thing, and gain advice and mentorship, as well as be able to provide what advice and mentorship I can to others, which will help catalyze the industry in ways that no other conference has. And then finally, of course, we'll be able to interact and provide input to what is most useful for the technologies that are coming down the pike that are necessary for an economical and just transition or climate transition. Yeah, so it's really a unique opportunity that I've never seen before. Right? So
it's our inaugural conference, so you'll have to tell me after it whether it was worth your effort. But it sounds like you're excited going in. I think that we wrote these industrial decarb reports. Really, it was led by the Office of Technology Transitions and Vanessa Chan's office, and then Kelly Cummins and the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. And one of the things that I find interesting is just how many companies that are in this growth stage, like you guys, haven't actually met a lot of these people, right? I mean, so one of the things is that all these folks are going to be at Deploy23, and so I think you'll finally meet some of these folks from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations and the Office of Technology Transitions. How important is it as we really get this public-private partnership lined up? Is it that folks really meet each other face to face?
It's incredibly important. So, just for example, if it weren't for the so far existing but relatively limited interactions that I've had with folks, people would not even know that there's an alternative way to make cement. Everyone would just be stuck in the minds of it's an alternative material or requires some other technology. So basically, just getting the knowledge out there is incredibly important. And then just with any business relationship, there's a certain type of trust that's built when you meet face to face. And we are, as startups, we are spread out all over the country, right? We're over in California. It is very rare that we get the opportunity to, meet with the folks that we really need to scale as quickly as the climate needs us to scale.
Absolutely. So we have about 600 people coming to Deploy23, each of which has their own opinions to share. And then I think we've got about half of those people, a little less than half, that have signed up to participate in these workshops. I think there's probably going to be an average of 40 to 50 people in each of these workshops, really through a facilitated dialogue. And I think the goal of that dialogue is to actually get everyone to share their opinions, to have a diversity of thought and conversation, and really have the DOE folks really listen to what you guys have to say. I think we've said plenty through the industrial decarbonization report. As you interact with your fellow companies, I guess I'm curious, how many of them do you know, and how much agreement, how much disagreement is there actually within the industry right now as you guys think about the decarbonization goals that the president has set by 2035 and 2050?
Yeah, we are pretty limited in the companies that we know, right? We interact with the companies that are in our sector, right? So I'm pretty familiar with the other cement companies, and then we're also familiar with the other climate companies in our investors' portfolio. And there are many, many more companies that are incredibly relevant to us, both just, they've scaled giant US manufacturing plants. I'm thinking of, one of the speakers, JB Strabo of Redwood Materials, right, has scaled some very large plants. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn from them. And, we may not be able to get the chance to talk to that person outside of a conference like this. And then also in terms of cement, there's a lot of commonalities and a lot of differences. And it'll be a great way to get in the room and hash that out and hopefully come out with figure out where we can advocate for each other together, because this is, climate is a huge problem. There's room for lots of companies. And if we can work together on this, which is, one of my hopes that Deploy23 will allow us to do, is figure out where common ground is, then we can hopefully solve the problem substantially faster. And, really, we would not be able to meet these companies without an event like this.
That's great. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is, DOE in particular has been spending a lot of time on technology, obviously, for many, many years, and I think has had a fantastic track record of innovation. But I think one of the things that this transition calls for is making sure that communities are deeply involved in these decisions, as well as making sure that these are good quality jobs, right? That people want to choose as careers. As a growth stage company, I think you're focused so much on your technology. How much time have you had to think about, you know, uh, how you work with local communities, how you, make sure you have the high quality labor that you need to be successful?
Yeah, well, it's actually a big reason I got into climate was trying to figure out how we can make sure that you know poor people of the world and the people who are just people of color, people who are disproportionately impacted by climate, um, are not suffering. Basically, like I want to solve the problem because it is such, or I want to work on this problem because it is so intersectional with everything, um, and and that's kind of been in our DNA since the beginning. One of the reasons why we decided to um, develop a process, or why it's so important for us to develop a process that made the exact same cement, right, ordinary Portland cement, that is conventionally produced, is because we were thinking about the justice aspects. So we were thinking that, well, it will be an enormous burden on retraining builders to use a new material, right? And it will be an enormous burden to put people at risk in a building that has a material that we don't understand. So these are kind of some of the foundational things that we were thinking at Brimstone. But then secondarily, right, there are new things that are that we have learned about through interacting with the Department of Energy and through going through processes like, I guess, being interviewed for the liftoff report and everything, that are really helpful in our thinking and have catalyzed our own understanding. So, for example, when you're siting a plant, you have to make sure that you're not doing that in such a way that harms local communities. And one of the major ways, right, there's an article that you previously shared in Utility Dive, right, that talked about the cost of processes, right? So if, for example, the DOE were to fund a process that is not economical without DOE support, then these jobs will not last. And you'll end up with, I think, maybe it was David Crane who said it, rusting hulks out there that that are
He has a talent for metaphors.
Yeah, exactly. They're taking up space and not and not providing jobs. So one of the things that DOE was really clear about in the liftoff report was that you need to make sure that processes are lower cost at scale. And that's been something that has, sort of been imprinted into our company, as like, we need to make sure that is our driving force, because that is what will actually create lasting jobs in the United States, regardless of what administration is around for the long haul, or what party's in charge or anything like that. And that's, one of the key things for this country. And I guess one more thing, like for the cement sector specifically, is that cement is too cheap to ship internationally to any major extent. So it is one of the things that, if we can jumpstart manufacturing of clean cement in the United States, it cannot move overseas, right? So it is one thing that will create durable, lasting jobs, which is another thing that's sort of motivating in this sphere for us.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. It's one of those things where I think when we think about, um, just how exciting this moment is, we basically have companies like yours who've spent the better part of, 10 years really getting their technology right. We now have this moment where the Inflation Reduction Act is, a little over a year old. We have the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so now we're in a place where we're really ready for this level of leadership and scale. And we need to make sure that we're actually bringing everybody along. And so I think when you think about how important it is to make sure that people are thinking about it, it's great to see that not only large Fortune 500 companies have been frankly thinking about this for a long time, but also growth stage companies have been thinking about this as well. One of the things I'm curious about, though, also is, you know, this is not a one-time thing, right? I mean, so we're gathering all these people today at next week here at the Deploy23 event, and I'm sure that we'll do it again the following year. But I think the question really becomes, how do we best facilitate this sort of public-private partnership? Because my sense is that, as we've already talked about, there's a standard setting role that the government takes. There's this specifying role that Department of Transportation and others can take. But, like the Inflation Reduction Act really is a 10-year down payment on getting a lot of this stuff commercialized. So how do you guys want to interact on a regular basis? What kind of cadence works for you? Like, how much resource are you expecting to put into making sure this public-private partnership works well? And how much do you expect in return from the public sector?
Yeah. So, as the liftoff report mentioned, right, the cement industry is near unique in that 50% of cement is specified and ultimately paid for by the federal government. So I can only speak for my sector, right? I think that everyone's sector is different, but in our sector, right, it is basically absurd to think that we could get to any reasonable scale without interaction with the government. So from our perspective, how exactly can this and should this public-private partnership go? I have some ideas of how I think would be most helpful to us. But one of the things I'm looking forward to about this conference is figuring out what the art of the possible is. For example, we need financing, and a conventional way to get financing is through advanced market commitments, contracts that say, like, we as the buyer of the product will agree to buy this when you make it. And
this is similar to the advanced market commitments that Microsoft and some of those players have done on renewable energy or on some of these other things, right? So it's really like an offtake agreement from someone who has these net zero goals, et cetera, and they want to buy green cement. And in your case, it might be a slight premium in the initial phases of it as you get your scale up and your cost down.
That's right. So we and this is something that we would like to interact with the federal government and what the liftoff report called out, but we'd also like to understand what is possible, like how possible are advanced market commitments and that sort of thing. They're possible in other sectors. Are they possible in cement? Let's talk about it. And this is the only venue that I'm aware of where you can talk about that.
So let's switch topics for a second around this bridge to bankability, right? For all of the companies like yours, what DOE has observed over the last 20 years is that when you look at solar, wind energy, lithium-ion battery storage, other types of technologies that have frankly made a tremendous amount of progress, it sort of takes about $100 billion of private sector investment, matched with obviously public sector support, to really cross this bridge to bankability. And the four major pillars of that bridge to bankability are, sort of first of a kind deployment, right? When everybody is scared out of their mind that your stuff, doesn't work, even though you've been testing it for, years and years and years. Then you've got like the 2nd through 6th deployments where you're really, achieving engineering excellence, but, folks are still a little nervous. Then you've got that 3rd phase, which is that, infamous, learning curve, right? Where your costs are really coming down now. And then you've got that 4th phase, which is you get full Wall Street approval, and you're now part of, normal finance, et cetera, right? I'm curious whether you agreed with that bridge to bankability, and those, and the way I'm describing it, and that sort of $100 billion, number for your sector. And then, whether you think that all these pieces, right, which is the Industrial Decarb Report, the Deploy23 conference, and these other interactions are helping people gain the confidence in the private sector to, allocate the dollars to the cement industry to be able to help you guys cross that bridge to bankability.
Yeah, so I think that $100 billion number is, I would like to think that that's a bit high for our sector. I'd like to think that we could do it with substantially less. And how I think about that is, you're absolutely right in our experiences that a conventional bank would not touch a technology like ours until we've built 2 or 3 full-scale plants, right? They're just the perceived risk is way too high. Even though the technology works and it's there, there's just too much company risk because we are a relatively small company. So the LPO and OSED, they fit in at really critical places. However, I think that if the money is used efficiently, right, we could probably do it in substantially less as a sector than $100 billion. So for example, like let's say a conventional cement plant today costs on order $1 billion. A first of a kind plant will cost probably more than that. So they have to scale up through a few phases. Let's say in total it's $3 or $4 billion, and maybe there are 3 or 4 or 5 companies that that will scale solutions that can solve the cement problem. So in total, I think that you could reasonably be looking at more like $10 to $25 billion if things are done efficiently, which I would say that this LPO is appearing to be doing things efficiently and be thinking very critically about how to do them, as is evidenced by, I feel like I'm a broken record now, the liftoff report. And maybe I just want to talk about it because I spent so much time reading it.
That's time you're never going to get back.
That's right.
So like, I mean, but the cement market is very large, right? I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars every single year, right? So, I mean, it does feel like, you're going to need to get procurement contracts of, almost 100 billion, not just in the United States, but around the world, right? Because, my sense is that, like, when you think about the solar industry, we were pretty much on our way, I'd say, in 2009. You had already had a lot of deployment in Germany and Spain and other places, a little bit in California, when the Loan Programs Office put in, I think the loan guarantees for the first 500 megawatt plus plants in the United States. But, it wasn't really until 2012 that those plants were constructed. There weren't a lot of buyers for those plants. And so Berkshire Hathaway bought almost all of them, along with NRG. And then I think it wasn't until 2017 or 2018, right? Remember in 2015, the solar industry got so frustrated that Wall Street wasn't paying attention to them that they launched their own yieldcos on Wall Street. One of which had a spectacular failure. And then it wasn't probably until 2017, 2019 that you really got real Wall Street acceptance of the technology at scale, right? And this is for solar, which today, in retrospect, everyone thinks is, super easy, right? And so part of part of the thing that I'm trying to struggle with is, and I do think it's going to take the full 10 years to get that level of respect.
I agree. I mean, I think that there's little evidence to suggest that we can move faster than that. Although I will say that programs like OSED and the LPO are effectively catalyzing investment, and more investment does mean more speed. We have heard from our investors many, many times that this type of money will allow our investors to put in more money with more confidence, right? and knowing that the government is a supporter of us to decarbonize faster, create more jobs, all of these wonderful things. So yes, I think that there is little track record to suggest that it won't take at least 10 years. But we have patient capital, and we also have catalytic things that if it is possible to go faster, I think that the things like the LPO and OSED are the things that are going to allow for us to go faster.
Well, it looks like we're already out of time. The 30 minutes flew by. I look forward to seeing you next week. For those of you who are interested in the liftoff reports, they're at liftoff.energy.gov. And, the Deploy23 conference is unfortunately sold out. But for those of you who are interested, I think some of the content will be recorded and shared afterwards. But thank you so much for your time, Cody. Really insightful. It seems like we have a lot to talk about in terms of really the process of commercialization and really bringing sectors along as well as investors along. So thank you for taking me through it.
Yeah, no, Jigar, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to seeing you next week too.
Awesome. Take care. Safe travels.
Thank you. Bye-bye.